I watched in disbelief as Karen Mitchell, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, marched over to Sheriff Daniel Hawkins' patrol car with a ruler in hand. Yes, an actual ruler. She bent down, measured the front tire, and declared, 6 inches over the yellow line. Just 6 inches. Sheriff Daniel was inside his elderly mother's house for barely 15 minutes, dropping off her heart medication like he did every Saturday morning. But that didn't matter to Karen. Rules were rules in her eyes, and she made sure everyone knew it. With a smug grin, she signed the tow order like she was stamping a royal decree. "The law is the law," she said, without even blinking. And just like that, the sheriff's cruiser was being hauled away, blue lights and all. Karen must have thought she was invincible, untouchable. If she could tow a law enforcement officer's vehicle without hesitation, what chance did the rest of us stand? But what she didn't realize in that moment was that this petty, arrogant stunt would be the biggest mistake of her life. What happened next would prove that karma may be slow, but it always hits its mark. And if you've ever been harassed, bullied, or shaken down by a power-hungry HOA, you'll want to hear how this all went down. It was a warm, picture-perfect Saturday morning in Sunset Ridge, one of those meticulously planned Houston suburbs where the lawns are greener than envy and the HOA rulebook reads like a legal encyclopedia. I was at Mrs. Dorothy's house down the street, trying to fix her TV, tangled in a mess of dusty wires behind her entertainment center. My 8-year-old daughter, Emma, was outside in the yard with our golden retriever, Lucky, enjoying the sunshine. Birds were chirping, neighbors were trimming hedges, and everything felt calm, until it didn't. Through the front window, I saw Sheriff Hawkins pull up to his mother's place just a few houses down. His mom, sweet old Mrs. Hawkins, had been dealing with serious heart issues, and he made it a point to visit her every weekend without fail, always bringing her medication, checking on her, making sure she was okay. He parked in a hurry, his front tire just barely nudging over the yellow line on the curb. 6 inches. Not even half a foot. You'd have to be actively searching for a violation to even notice it. Enter Karen Mitchell. She strutted down the street like she was auditioning for a role as a villain in a legal drama. She had her measuring tape in one hand, her phone in the other, and trailing behind her was Brad Stevens, her personal enforcer, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. She was already barking into her phone. "Yes, I need a tow truck at 457 Maple Street. Immediate violation. Unauthorized vehicle." I froze, wires still in hand, and moved to the window. Mrs. Dorothy joined me, peering over my shoulder with a look of pure disbelief. "She's lost her mind," she muttered. "That's the sheriff's car." But Karen didn't care. She was already squatting beside the patrol car, dramatically measuring the distance from the tire to the line, like she was collecting evidence at a crime scene. Brad took pictures from every angle, snapping away like paparazzi at a red carpet event. 6.2 inches, Karen announced to the small crowd that was starting to gather. In direct violation of HOA Regulation 7.4, subsection B. Any vehicle parked beyond marked street boundaries may be towed immediately. No exceptions, not even for law enforcement. She said it proudly, like she'd memorized it. I wouldn't have been surprised if she had it tattooed on her arm. Just then, Sheriff Daniel came out of his mother's house, clearly confused, still in uniform. "Karen, what are you doing?" he asked. "My mom needs her heart meds. I was inside for 15 minutes. Karen didn't flinch. Her grin widened, like she'd been waiting for this moment all week. "The law is the law, Sheriff. If I make an exception for you, I have to make one for everyone. You know how it is." She held up the signed tow order like it was a trophy, waving it in front of him. "Your vehicle is officially impounded for unlawful parking." Even the tow truck driver looked uncomfortable as he hooked the sheriff's cruiser to the winch. More neighbors came out of their houses, whispering and filming. I joined them, phone in hand. This was too surreal not to record. Karen climbed up on the tow truck side rail to supervise the operation like she was commanding a military strike. She slipped on the step, nearly fell, and had to be caught by Brad. A gust of wind snatched the parking ticket right out of her clipboard and slapped it across her face. She shrieked, flailed, her hair frizzing slightly in the breeze, but that smug expression never faded. 7 vehicles towed under my watch, she announced, proudly brushing herself off. The rules apply to everyone. But the murmurs around the crowd were growing louder. "She towed an ambulance last month," someone said. Mr. Wilson was having a heart attack. Another neighbor chimed in. I heard Dragon Core wants to buy up the whole neighborhood. Think she's clearing the way. I kept filming, focusing on Karen's face as she practically beamed watching the patrol car get lifted. Sheriff Daniel just stood there, seething. This isn't over, Karen, he said quietly. You've gone too far. Karen only laughed. File a complaint if you want. Oh wait, I am the board. She turned, but not before tossing one final jab over her shoulder. Next time, maybe don't park like you own the place. 6 inches is 6 inches. The tow truck drove away with flashing lights, the sheriff's cruiser rolling behind it like a prisoner in chains. My daughter Emma had come inside by then, tugging at my shirt. Her voice was soft and confused. Daddy, why did that mean lady take the police car? Isn't Sheriff Daniel a good guy? I didn't know what to say. How do you explain to a child that some adults use power not to protect, but to punish? Later that night, something about Karen's behavior wouldn't leave me alone. I went online and started digging through the HOA bylaws. Buried deep in the fine print was something Karen clearly hadn't expected anyone to read. No vehicle, not even one in violation, could be towed without 3 written warnings. Not 1, 3. And there was no clause excluding emergency or law enforcement vehicles. That meant Karen had broken her own rules, on camera. And then, as I sat there by the window, I heard her voice float across the night air, clear as day on a phone call she thought no one could hear. The sheriff was just the beginning, she said. Tomorrow, we start with Thompson's house. 3 days later, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. The offense. My lawn was allegedly half an inch too tall. Half an inch. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was war. The fine was $200, payable within 48 hours. I knew right then, it was only the beginning. Karen Mitchell had officially declared war, and I was next in her crosshairs. The video I'd posted of her having the sheriff's car towed had already racked up over 500 shares in our neighborhood group, and knowing Karen, forgiveness was not in her vocabulary. She was a grudge holder, the kind of person who saw every slight as a personal vendetta. Standing in my driveway, holding a measuring tape, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. My grass was exactly 3 inches tall, precisely within HOA guidelines. But with someone like Karen, facts were meaningless. She didn't follow rules, she invented them. And when people didn't bend, she made their lives unbearable. The very next morning, I noticed something odd. A shiny, new no parking sign had magically appeared overnight in front of my house. It wasn't a city-issued sign, just one of those flimsy metal ones anyone could buy from the hardware store. It had been planted right in the sweet spot where my customers typically parked when dropping off electronics for repair. My little home run repair business was my livelihood. Ever since leaving the military, it had been my only source of income. And Karen knew that. This wasn't just pettiness, it was targeted sabotage. By noon, I'd already lost 3 customers. They couldn't find parking and didn't want to hike 2 blocks carrying laptops and game consoles. And just to add insult to injury, Brad Stevens was sitting across the street in his car, taking photos of every single vehicle that so much as slowed near my house. When old Mr. Peterson stopped by to ask about fixing his antique radio, Brad actually got out of his car and started writing him a ticket before the poor man could even cut the engine. It was getting out of hand. So I did what any sane person would do. I called the city's parking department. And that's when the truth came out. Karen hadn't obtained a permit for that sign. In fact, you're legally required to get one before posting any no parking notices on public property. That afternoon, a city inspector came out, took one glance at Karen's fake enforcement zone, and slapped her with a $1,000 fine for illegal signage. You should have seen her face when she got the notice. She stormed into the middle of the street, waving the citation like it was a betrayal of the highest order, screaming at Brad as if this mess was his doing. How dare they find me? I'm trying to maintain order in this neighborhood, she shrieked. And Brad, trying to be helpful, made the fatal mistake of suggesting they maybe should have applied for permits first. Karen's head snapped toward him like a hawk spotting prey. Are you questioning my methods, Brad? Remember, I know about your little parking incident last year. You wouldn't want that to go public, would you? That was the moment Tom Bradley knocked on my door. Tom and I had served together in Afghanistan, and after leaving the service, he became a damn good lawyer. He also had a personal score to settle. Marcus, you won't believe this, he said, taking a sip of coffee in my living room. Last year, she fined me $500 for parking in front of my own mother's house on Thanksgiving. Claimed I was blocking the sidewalk by 2 inches. But Tom had been digging deeper. Much deeper. He'd discovered that Karen had been in secret talks with Dragon Corp, a major real estate developer with a reputation for buying up neighborhoods and turning them into commercial zones. The new highway extension is going to pass right by here, Tom explained. This land's going to be worth millions. Suddenly, everything made sense. Karen's obsession with parking and violations wasn't just about power or rules, it was about money. She was being paid to make life here so miserable that people would eventually cave and sell. Meanwhile, Brad was facing his own humiliation. In his overzealous efforts, he'd accidentally ticketed a car belonging to another HOA board member, someone who had come to visit Karen. I watched from my window as she tore into him in her driveway, berating him in front of everyone. I can't even trust you to recognize my own colleagues' vehicles. What am I paying you for? Brad stood silently, absorbing the verbal blows, but I saw it. Something in him was changing. Later, as he sat in his car pretending to monitor my house, I noticed him pull out a folder. He started snapping photos of documents with his phone. That's when I realized Brad was starting to keep records of his own. The thing about bullies? They never realize when they've gone too far. Then Karen escalated. She announced a new initiative, 24-hour parking enforcement. She hired 2 additional parking specialists who would patrol in shifts, measuring how close cars were to curbs, timing how long vehicles stayed parked, and issuing fines for even the smallest infractions. The neighborhood went into full-blown panic mode. Mrs. Rodriguez down the street got fined because her daughter's car was parked facing the wrong direction. Mr. Kim got slapped with a $100 ticket because his trash can was supposedly too close to the curb, an offense that somehow violated a made-up parking rule. Fear spread like wildfire. Visitors stopped coming. Neighbors parked blocks away and walked home. Some organized carpools just to reduce the number of parked vehicles. It felt like we were living in a surveillance state, but instead of the government, it was Karen and her HOA henchmen. So I fought back, with humor. I put up my own sign, free parking zone, because neighbors should be neighborly. I used bright yellow duct tape to mark the exact boundary of my property, making it crystal clear that Karen's fantasy rules ended where my driveway began. The sign lasted a single day before it disappeared, but not before half the neighborhood saw it and shared it online. A quiet rebellion was starting. People began posting their own stories of Karen's parking patrol in the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone even started a betting pool. How long until she tried to tow a mail truck? But the laughter stopped when Tom dropped the bomb. He'd connected all the dots. Every single homeowner who'd been fined heavily, harassed, or had their vehicle towed had one thing in common. They'd all refused to sell to the mysterious buyers who'd been approaching people over the past year. That night, as I sat reviewing Tom's paperwork, my daughter Emma came in to say goodnight. "Daddy, why is that mean lady making everyone sad?" she asked. I hugged her tight, trying to explain in the simplest way I could. Sometimes, sweetheart, people want things that don't belong to them. And instead of asking nicely, they make life hard until you give up. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "But we're not giving up, right, Daddy?" I kissed her forehead. "No, baby, we're not giving up. We're going to stand up to the bullies." After she went to bed, I made a decision. If Karen wanted war, then war is what she would get, but we'd fight smart. I started calling neighbors I knew had been targeted. We were going to organize. We were going to push back. The resistance had begun. And just as I was planning the next steps, Brad's car rolled slowly past my house. But this time, he wasn't photographing cars. He dropped something in my mailbox. When I opened it, I found a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Check the meeting recordings from last month. You'll want to hear what she said about Dragon Corporation. Be careful, she's planning something big. 10 families on her list for tomorrow night." At 7 o'clock the next morning, Sheriff Daniel showed up at my door, still in plain clothes, since his patrol car was still sitting in the impound lot. "Marcus," he said grimly, "we need to talk." He glanced over his shoulder like he expected Karen to jump out of the bushes with a clipboard. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and I don't think you realize how deep this goes." I invited him in. What he told me made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 years, Karen had orchestrated the towing of 47 vehicles. She'd issued over 300 parking violations, and she had driven 12 families out of the neighborhood. But the worst part? Daniel's voice trembled as he said it. She even had an ambulance towed. My mother's friend, Mrs. Chun, was having a heart attack. The EMTs were delayed for 20 minutes because Karen said the ambulance was illegally parked. That woman nearly died. And it wasn't just coincidence. Daniel had done his own digging. Every single house that had been sold after a family left in frustration had been bought at a discounted price by the same LLC. A shell company. No real name, no real people, just a front. And we both knew exactly who was behind it. Owned by Dragon Corporation. They were quietly assembling parcels of land for a massive new development. Shopping centers, condos, upscale retail, you name it. And the kicker? Every time a house sold, someone got a generous finder's fee. I didn't even need to guess who. Karen. Suddenly, her obsessive enforcement of parking violations made perfect sense. She wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president who enjoyed writing up fines. She was a corporate foot soldier, a mercenary in a blazer, using petty infractions as weapons of war to push residents out. Parking citations were just her camouflage. She was clearing the chessboard for a commercial empire. That night, I sent a carefully worded message to the neighborhood group chat. I didn't mention resistance or protest. I called it a community discussion, just a casual meet-up to talk about concerns. To my surprise, 15 people showed up. Given how scared everyone was of retaliation, it felt like a miracle. Bob Johnson was one of the first through the door. He was still boiling with anger over a $200 fine he'd received. His friend had parked in his own driveway to watch the NBA Finals. The car never touched the street. Bob kept repeating, fists clenched. It was entirely on my damn property. Sarah Williams, a young live streamer who'd recently moved in, shared her own outrageous experience. She'd been threatened with a $500 fine because her camera crew's van had been parked outside for less than 10 minutes during a video shoot. 10 minutes, she said, disbelief etched on her face. We were filming a promo, with permits. But the story that silenced the room came from Linda Garcia, our neighborhood nurse. Through trembling lips, she described how her car had been towed while she was performing CPR on Mr. Wilson during a heart attack. I saved that man's life, she said, tears filling her eyes. And I had to pay $500 to get my car back. Not everyone was ready to stand up. A few attendees looked visibly shaken, murmuring about how they couldn't afford to be targeted. What if she fines us even more? Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice cracking. I'm on a fixed income. I can't pay hundreds of dollars for nonsense. Bob stood up, face flushed with fury, and said, if we don't stand together now, we'll lose our homes one by one. Is that what you want? To watch corporate vultures turn our neighborhood into a strip mall? The room burst into debate. Some people wanted to lawyer up, others suggested alerting the media, and a few floated more creative forms of resistance. But in the midst of the chaos, I noticed my daughter, Emma, quietly working in the corner with construction paper and markers. When the noise peaked, she walked to the center of the room and raised her hand. Excuse me, she said in her small but steady voice. Everyone fell silent. She held up what she'd been making, brightly colored friendship bracelets with letters woven in, SFFF. I made these for everyone, she said. It means Sunset Freedom Fighters. If we all wear them, we'll remember we're a team. The room hushed. Here was an 8-year-old showing more heart and leadership than most adults ever dared. One by one, people stepped forward to take a bracelet. Mrs. Patterson hugged Emma, tears streaming down her face. You're right, sweetheart. We are a team. That moment changed everything. We were no longer isolated families dodging fines. We were a united community. We launched a group chat called Sunset Freedom Fighters and started assigning roles. Sarah would document everything on camera. Linda would keep track of health and safety violations. Bob would link us with other HOA resistance groups across Houston. I coordinated legal action with Tom and Sheriff Daniel, who had grown increasingly concerned. But the very next morning, Karen made her move. All 15 households that had attended the meeting received official notices for illegal assembly and disturbing the peace. The fine? A jaw-dropping $1,000 per home. She had eyes on us, probably through Brad or one of her other flunkies. But this time, she'd gone too far. Real Texas law, not Karen's fantasy HOA code, protects the right to peaceful assembly. Tom helped us draft a cease and desist letter, warning that we would sue Karen personally and the HOA if they tried to enforce the fines. We weren't hiding anymore. The resistance had gone public. Then came the escalation. At 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the unmistakable sound of diesel engines. I ran to the window. My heart sank. 3 tow trucks were pulling up in perfect sync, targeting the cars of Bob, Sarah, and Linda. It was a deliberate strike, punishment for speaking out. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and messaged our group chat. Within minutes, neighbors spilled out of their homes, forming a human wall around the vehicles. Some were in robes, others barefoot, but we stood united. "This is illegal," Bob shouted at the drivers. "You can't tow from private property." But they didn't care. They had clipboards, official-looking documents, and Brad, flanked by 2 other HOA enforcers, smug and self-assured. Sarah began live streaming to her 10,000 followers. "This is what corruption looks like," she said. "They come in the dead of night, like some kind of parking Gestapo." Then Sheriff Daniel showed up, off-duty, half-dressed, but his presence changed everything. "Think carefully about what you're doing," he told the tow truck drivers. "Towing from private property without legal cause is theft. I've got 50 witnesses right here." The drivers hesitated. Brad was sweating bullets. After a tense standoff, the trucks backed off. They unhooked the cars and drove away. We'd won this round. But the message was clear. Karen was ready to cross the line from unethical to criminal. As people started heading home, I noticed Brad lingering by his car. He kept glancing at me and then at his phone. Finally, he walked over, voice low. "She's got a list," he whispered. 2 houses she wants cleared out by the end of the month. Yours is at the top." He pressed a USB drive into my hand. "These are the audio files from tonight. She planned this. With Dragon Corporation. They're getting impatient." And just like that, he was gone, vanishing into the night. As I stared down at the USB in my hand, it hit me. We weren't just dealing with a corrupt HOA president anymore. This went higher, much higher, all the way to City Hall. And if Brad was turning, maybe, just maybe, we had a shot. The next morning, Tom walked into my living room with Lisa Martinez, an actress with fire in her eyes. "She fined me $1,000, Lisa said, shaking her head, "because our equipment van was parked for 10 minutes during a commercial shoot. We had city permits." She said HOA rules override everything. Tom laid out our plan. Lisa would pretend to be my girlfriend to throw Karen off her game. Lisa grinned. "Oh, I'm going to enjoy this." The plan was simple, but it was time to play offense. Karen had crossed every line, and we were done playing by her rules. Because it didn't fit her narrative of targeting vulnerable single fathers, she seemed to deliberately ignore me, until the moment she thought I might be in a relationship. That possibility alone could be enough to throw her off balance, to redirect her obsessive attention just long enough for us to collect the evidence we needed. So, we played a role. The next evening, Lisa arrived at my house in a modest, unassuming sedan and deliberately parked 6 inches over the yellow line, just to bait the system. As expected, Brad showed up within minutes, camera in hand, prepared to document the violation like a dutiful little watchdog. But when Lisa stepped out of the car and walked up to me with confidence, planting a slow, deliberate kiss on my lips right there on the front porch, I saw Brad's confusion flare behind his windshield. His camera drooped slightly, and then he reached for his phone, probably to call Karen and report this strange development. Lisa and I sat down on the porch swing, laughing and sipping iced tea, playing the part of a new couple without a care in the world. We kept one eye on Brad, who looked like he was having an existential crisis in real time. "He looks like he's short-circuiting," Lisa whispered with a smirk, leaning into me again. "I don't think he knows whether to give me a ticket or to call in reinforcements about your new love life." We stayed out there for over an hour, always within clear view of the street, making it impossible for Karen's spies to miss our act. By the end of it, there was no ticket on Lisa's windshield. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever. Our plan worked better than we hoped. For the next 3 days, the aggressive parking enforcement that had plagued my home disappeared almost entirely. Karen even walked by once while Lisa and I staged a picnic lunch in the front yard. The sight of us laughing together must have thrown her. She paused, glared, then turned around and walked off without a word. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last. Karen Mitchell didn't claw her way to HOA presidency by being gullible. Less than a week later, the backlash arrived. She'd clearly done her homework, probably hired a private investigator. Before long, she had uncovered Lisa's identity, her connection to Tom, and even her career. The retaliation came down like a hammer. First, she targeted my business. Every vehicle that pulled into my auto shop, customers I depended on, was towed within minutes under the guise of violating a fake commercial vehicle ordinance. There was no such rule, but that didn't stop her. My income dropped by over 70% in just days. Then came the power outage. An entire block, mine, lost electricity for 48 hours due to some supposed scheduled maintenance. But worst of all was what I found one morning when I showed up to open the shop. Bright red spray paint scrawled across my front window. "Troublemaker lives here." Emma saw it before I could cover it up. She stood frozen in front of the shop, eyes wide with fear, clinging to me like a lifeline. "Daddy, why do they hate us?" she asked, her voice small, trembling. I knelt beside her, struggling to put rage and heartbreak into words an 8-year-old could understand. "They don't hate us, sweetheart. They're just scared of people who stand up to them. When bullies realize they can't control you, they get desperate." That night, I sat alone by the fireplace, staring at the framed family photo of Sarah on the mantel. My late wife, always smiling, always brave. I whispered aloud, "What would you do, Sarah? Would you fight, or would you run?" And somewhere in the quiet, I could almost hear her voice in my mind. "You know the answer, Marcus. You never run from a fight, not when you're protecting what matters." Meanwhile, Brad was spiraling. I'd noticed it more and more since he'd begun secretly feeding me information. The strain was showing in every aspect of his demeanor. The breaking point came during a confrontation I watched unfold from across the street. Karen was berating him in her driveway, loudly calling him pathetic and useless because he had missed a car parked 1 inch too close to a fire hydrant. Brad stood there, stoic, but his hands were clenched into fists, and his jaw was locked tight with fury. That night, I found another USB drive in my mailbox. This one changed everything. It contained photographs of internal HOA documents, folders labeled Project Clean Sweep, with 47 homes marked for removal. Even more damning were emails between Karen and a corporate entity called Dragon Corporation. The arrangement was crystal clear. Karen was receiving $50,000 for every family that left. On top of that, she was getting 30% of every single towing fee. She had turned our entire neighborhood into a personal ATM. Then came the final straw. Emma came home from school in tears. Some of the kids, children of Karen's loyal board members, had told her they weren't allowed to play with her anymore. Their mothers had warned them that Emma came from a bad family. My daughter cried in my arms, heartbroken, confused, humiliated. That was the moment I broke. That was the moment I decided I would stop playing defense. I picked up the phone and called Tom and Sheriff Daniel. "No more half measures," I said. "We go on offense. We take her down." Tom had been quietly assembling a legal case, but we still lacked one critical piece: direct access to her files. Sheriff Daniel suggested something bold, dangerous, even breaking into her office at the HOA building. We knew the risks, but at this point, being polite and cautious hadn't done a thing. Then, out of the blue, Brad showed up at my door. It was nearly midnight. He looked pale, exhausted, and terrified. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "She's gone too far. Making kids cry? That's not what I signed up for." He told me he'd seen Emma earlier that day putting up handmade lost bike posters, trying to find the bicycle Karen had confiscated because it was parked incorrectly. "She was so brave," Brad said, knocking on doors, looking scared, but still trying. That's when I realized I had to choose. He handed me a key. "This opens the HOA office. Karen doesn't know I made a copy. There's a safe in her desk. Combination is 4729. Everything you need is in there." He started to leave, then turned back. "I'm sorry, Marcus. For everything. I was just trying to keep my job. But some things aren't worth a paycheck." As he drove away, I stood on the porch, holding the key. It felt heavier than metal should. Maybe because I knew what it meant. This was our chance to end it, once and for all. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. A video file from Brad. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. On the screen was Karen, seated at a table with 2 men in suits, casually counting stacks of $100 bills. The audio was crystal clear. 10 more families gone. 10 more payments. Keep towing cars until they break. I don't care if you have to tow a school bus full of children. I want this neighborhood empty by Christmas. The war had reached its climax. The annual HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at the community center. For the first time in years, people were actually showing up. We had 180 confirmed attendees out of 200 households. That level of turnout was unprecedented. Karen must have sensed she was losing control because that morning she sent out a last-minute notice. No video recording, only 2 minutes of speaking time per household, and security would be present to maintain order. But Tom had anticipated this. Under Texas law, homeowners had every right to record public meetings. Any attempt to suppress discussion or transparency would be legally challenged. When Emma and I arrived at the community center, the air was electric with tension and anticipation. I'd arranged for Mrs. Dorothy to watch Emma during the most intense moments, but she looked up at me and said, "I want to see you stand up to the mean lady, Daddy." And I promised her I would. Eye contact swept across the room as people entered, tension buzzing in the air. 2 security guards flanked the community center doors, an absurd sight for a simple neighborhood meeting, but typical of Karen's intimidation playbook. Yet, as the crowd poured in, I noticed something rare, uncertainty flickering across Karen's usually smug face. She had expected maybe 30 or 40 compliant residents, but instead was facing an army of fed-up neighbors, tired of her authoritarian antics. Sarah was already live-streaming despite the new no recording rule posted that morning. One of the security guards approached her, but before he could say a word, Sheriff Daniel, fully uniformed and every inch the law, stepped in between them. "Unless you want to be charged with violating civil rights," he said in a calm but firm voice. I'd stepped back. The guard hesitated, then quickly retreated, sensing he was outmatched. Karen opened the meeting with theatrical aggression, slamming her gavel like a judge delivering a death sentence. "Before we begin," she declared, her voice sharp, "let me remind you that this is a civilized meeting. Any disruptions will result in immediate removal and possible fines." Her words sparked murmurs of discontent, but I raised my hand, signaling for quiet. We had to play this smart. She ran through her scripted agenda, parroting phrases about beautification projects and fiscal responsibility, completely avoiding the burning issues that had brought everyone here tonight. Then she asked, almost nervously, if there were any questions. I stood up, locking eyes with her. "I have a question, Madam President," I said, letting my voice carry through the packed room. "Can you explain why you had Sheriff Daniel's patrol car towed without following the 3-warning protocol outlined in our own HOA bylaws?" Gasps and murmurs of support echoed across the room. Karen's face flushed deep crimson. That vehicle was in clear violation of parking regulations. "The rules apply to everyone equally," she snapped. "Then why?" I continued, holding up my phone. "Do I have video evidence of you saying," and I quote, "the sheriff was just the beginning. Tomorrow we start with Thompson's house?" I hit play. Her voice filled the room. Silence fell, then exploded into outrage. Karen pounded her gavel again and again. "That's taken out of context," she barked. "Security, remove this man." But nobody moved. Even the guards could sense this wasn't just another HOA squabble, it was a reckoning. That's when Bob stood up. "I motion for a vote of no confidence in our president," he said loudly. Sarah leapt up. "I second that motion." The room came alive. Residents stood one after another to speak. Linda recounted how her car was towed while she was performing CPR on a neighbor. Mrs. Rodriguez shared how the fines had become so oppressive her daughter stopped visiting. Mr. Kim showed receipts, thousands of dollars worth, of bogus parking violations issued without warning. Karen's carefully built facade was collapsing. She was losing control, and fast. "Enough!" she screamed, abandoning her fake professionalism. "You people don't understand. I'm trying to save this neighborhood. Property values were falling. I was trying to fix it." Then Brad stood. For a moment, it seemed like he might defend her. But then he turned to face the crowd, visibly shaken but resolute. "She's lying," he said. "I can't stay quiet anymore." The room froze. Karen made me tow 47 cars, including an ambulance with a patient inside. She gets 30% of every towing fee and $50,000 from Dragon Corp for every family that moves out. Chaos erupted. People were shouting, demanding answers. Karen's face turned ghost white. "Brad, you're fired. Get out," she shrieked. But Brad wasn't done. He walked over and handed me a USB drive. This is everything. Emails, payment records, audio of her giving illegal orders. I'm sorry it took me this long to speak up. Karen's attorney, Aaron, tried to take control, yelling about defamation and lawsuits, but it was too late. Tom stood and calmly announced he had already filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office regarding HOA misconduct. Sheriff Daniel added that he had launched a criminal investigation into the illegal towing operation. The security guards left, quietly and without a word, wanting no part in the disaster unraveling before them. Karen made one last desperate move, slamming her gavel and yelling, "This meeting is adjourned," before storming out. But no one followed her. Instead, we took a vote right there and then. Unanimous. Karen was removed as president. A temporary board was formed to investigate the corruption. The sense of relief was immediate and overwhelming. People were hugging, crying, smiling for the first time in months, maybe years. Emma, my daughter, ran up and hugged me tightly. "You did it, Daddy. You beat the mean lady." I smiled and held her close, but a shadow of unease crept in. Karen Mitchell wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was vengeful, calculated. I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. As the crowd began to thin, Brad came over to me again. "There's something else," he whispered. During the meeting, I heard her. She made a call. She said, "Execute Plan B." I don't know what it means, but be careful. Sarah overheard and immediately posted a warning in the community group chat. Within minutes, phones lit up with alerts. Everyone was on edge, watching their backs. That night, back home, I tucked Emma into bed. She looked up at me sleepily. "Is it over now, Daddy? Can we park our bikes anywhere again?" I wanted to tell her yes. I really did. But something in my gut said otherwise. "Soon, baby. Very soon." I turned off her light and walked to the window. Something caught my eye, tire tracks. Fresh ones, cutting through our grass. I rushed outside and followed the trail around to the backyard. Emma's bike was gone. Her little pink bike with the butterfly stickers, the one she always parked by the back door, was missing. In its place was a piece of paper taped to the fence. Hands trembling, I unfolded it. The message was typed in bold, all caps. "Actions have consequences. This is just the beginning." Karen had just made this war personal. She crossed a line she could never come back from by targeting my 8-year-old daughter. And that was the worst mistake of her life. That Texas law was crystal clear. Homeowners had the right to record public meetings, and any attempt to silence or restrict reasonable public discourse could be challenged legally. We weren't walking into that meeting unprepared. We were armed with knowledge, documentation, and a community finally awake and united. And Karen, well, Karen knew it. You could feel the anxiety buzzing in the community center when I arrived with my daughter, Emma. I had arranged for Mrs. Dorothy to watch her during the more heated parts of the meeting, but Emma had insisted on being there for the beginning. "I want to see you stand up to the mean lady, Daddy," she said, her voice filled with that fierce little spark she got from her mother. The room was arranged to look as official as Karen could make it, her gavel polished and placed beside a nameplate at the raised table up front. Brad sat stiffly to her left, eyes averted, clearly uncomfortable with what was coming. 2 hired security guards flanked the doors, which was absurd for a neighborhood meeting, but typical of Karen's intimidation tactics. As people filled the seats, more than double what Karen had expected, you could see her confidence starting to crumble. She thought she'd be facing a handful of complainers. Instead, she faced a full room of fed-up neighbors, united and ready to challenge her authority. Sarah, undeterred by the no recording signs Karen had posted, was already streaming live on her phone. When one of the guards moved toward her, Sheriff Daniel, decked out in full uniform, stepped in between them, his voice calm but commanding. "Unless you want to be charged with violating civil rights, I'd step back." The guard backed off instantly. Karen called the meeting to order, slamming her gavel with unnecessary force, like a judge handing down a death sentence. "Before we begin," she barked, "I want to remind everyone this is a civilized meeting. Any disruptions will result in immediate removal and possible fines." There was a low rumble of discontent from the crowd, but I raised my hand and signaled for quiet. We had to play this smart. Karen launched into her usual list of self-serving accomplishments: beautification projects, responsible budgeting, talking like nothing was wrong. like she hadn't been weaponizing HOA rules to terrorize the very people sitting before her. Finally, when she smugly asked if there were any questions, I stood up. My voice was calm, clear, and loud enough to echo off the walls. "I have a question, Madam President. Can you explain why you had Sheriff Daniel's patrol car towed without following the 3-warning protocol outlined in our own bylaws?" The room erupted in gasps and murmurs of agreement. Karen's face turned an angry shade of red. "That vehicle was in violation of parking regulations," she snapped. "The rules apply to everyone equally." "Oh, really?" I replied, taking out my phone. "Then why do I have a recording of you saying, and I quote, 'The sheriff was just the beginning. Tomorrow we start with Thompson's house'? Sounds more like targeted harassment than fair enforcement." I hit play, and her voice filled the room. This time, the murmurs turned into outrage. Karen banged her gavel desperately. "That's taken out of context. Security, remove this man." But no one moved, not even the guards. They stood still, suddenly understanding they were witnessing something bigger than HOA politics. That's when Bob stood up. I motioned for a vote of no confidence in our president. Sarah shot to her feet. I second that motion. One by one, neighbors stood, telling their stories. Linda spoke through tears about how her car was towed while she was performing CPR on a neighbor. Mrs. Rodriguez recounted the excessive fines that drove her daughter away. Mr. Kim produced receipts totaling thousands of dollars in bogus fees. It was a flood, years of frustration crashing into one unstoppable moment. Karen tried to maintain control, her voice rising. "Enough. You people don't understand. I'm trying to save this neighborhood." Property values were stagnant. I was improving things. But the final blow didn't come from us. It came from Brad. He slowly stood, and for a moment, it looked like he might defend her. But then he turned to the crowd. "She's lying," he said, his voice trembling but resolute. "I can't stay quiet anymore. Karen made me tow 47 cars, including an ambulance with a patient still inside. She gets 30% of every towing fee and $50,000 for every family that moves out." The room exploded into chaos. Shouting, disbelief, fury. Karen went pale. "Brad, you're fired. Get out." But he wasn't finished. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket and handed it to me. "This has everything. Emails with Dragon Core, payment records, recordings of her ordering the tows. I'm sorry it took me this long to do the right thing." Karen tried to shout over him, yelling about defamation and lawsuits, but the dam had burst. Tom stood up and announced he had already filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. Sheriff Daniel stepped forward and confirmed an official criminal investigation was underway into Karen's illegal towing operation. The guards left quietly, realizing they didn't want to be part of whatever storm was about to break. Karen's last desperate act was to declare the meeting adjourned and storm out of the building. But no one followed her. Instead, we stayed. We voted. By unanimous decision, Karen Mitchell was removed as HOA president, and an interim board was appointed to investigate the financial and legal fallout of her time in power. Relief flooded the room like fresh air after a long storm. People hugged, cried, celebrated. For the first time in months, maybe years, we felt free. Emma ran into my arms, beaming. "You did it, Daddy. You beat the mean lady." But as I held her, I couldn't fully enjoy the moment. Karen wasn't the kind of woman who would go down quietly. She had shown us she was willing to hurt people for power and profit. As the crowd dispersed, Brad approached me with a worried look. "There's something else," he said in a hushed tone. During the meeting, she called someone. I heard her say, "Execute Plan B." I don't know what that means, but be careful. Sarah overheard and instantly posted a warning to the neighborhood group chat. Within minutes, every household was on alert. We didn't know what Plan B meant, but we knew Karen. And that meant it wouldn't be good. Still, for tonight, we had won. The tyrant had been dethroned, exposed in front of the very people she had terrorized. That night, I tucked Emma into bed. She looked up at me sleepily. "Is it over now, Daddy? Can we park our bikes anywhere again?" I wanted so badly to say yes, but something deep in my gut whispered otherwise. "Soon, baby. Very soon." As I turned off her light and glanced out the window, something caught my eye. Tire tracks, fresh, cutting through the grass near the back of the house. I stepped outside to check and followed them around to the backyard. That's when I noticed it. Emma's bike was gone. Her little pink bicycle with butterfly stickers, The one she always parked by the back door vanished. In its place was a single piece of paper taped to the wall. Hands shaking, I unfolded it. The message was typed, bold and cold. Actions have consequences. This is just the beginning. Karen had just crossed a line no one could uncross. She had made this war personal by targeting my 8-year-old daughter. And that was her biggest mistake. Of the 200 witnesses, all with phones raised and recording, I stood on my driveway with my daughter Emma wrapped in a thick blanket beside me. Her small face was set with a look of stubborn courage, even though it was barely past dawn. "Are they really going to try and take our car, Daddy?" she asked, her voice a mixture of worry and disbelief. I pulled her in tighter. "They're going to try, sweetheart. But take a look around. See all these people? We're not going to let them." The street was coming alive, neighbors gathering, some still in slippers and robes, others clutching coffee cups or paper bags of donuts that Mrs. Dorothy had started passing out as early as 5 a.m. It looked less like the scene of an impending confrontation and more like a small-town block party, fueled by solidarity and brewing anger. Then, right on the dot at 6 a.m., the rumble began. A convoy of tow trucks, 5 in total, rolled slowly onto our street like an invading force. That was enough steel and horsepower to strip an entire neighborhood clean of vehicles in under an hour. But as they reached the corner, the drivers hit the brakes. Their engines idled, and their expressions shifted as they saw what was waiting for them. Dozens and dozens of residents standing shoulder to shoulder, forming a wall of defiance. This was not the quiet, sleepy neighborhood they'd expected. Then came the queen herself, Karen. Her Mercedes eased to a halt behind the trucks, and she stepped out like a general arriving at the battlefield. Dressed in a sharp designer suit, clipboard in one hand, and a smug grin that never reached her eyes, she was flanked by 3 men in tailored suits who practically oozed corporate lawyer and a squad of private security guards in sunglasses. "Good morning, neighbors," Karen called out, her voice thick with fake cheer. "I see you've all decided to witness the enforcement of HOA regulations. How civic-minded of you." From across the street, Sarah was already live-streaming to her growing audience, now over 50,000 strong. "The dictator has arrived, folks," she narrated. "Let's see how this plays out." Karen strutted toward her first target, Bob's old pickup truck, but she found herself blocked by 30 people who had formed a human chain around it, arm in arm. "This is obstruction," she snapped. "Move aside or face additional fines." But no one budged. Bob stepped forward, calm and unshaken. "Karen, you've been voted out. You're no longer president. You have no authority here." Karen's laugh rang out like shattered glass. "That vote was illegal. My attorneys have already filed the paperwork. Until the court says otherwise, I am still in charge. And these vehicles are in violation." She raised her arm, signaling the tow trucks. But the drivers didn't move. They were looking past her now, and their faces had gone pale. A figure approached up the sidewalk, Sheriff Daniel. And he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 serious-looking FBI agents, and behind them came 4 fully marked police cruisers. "Karen Mitchell," one of the agents said, his voice crisp and loud enough for the whole block to hear. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include embezzlement, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." The transformation on Karen's face was almost cinematic. Shock, then fury, and then something wild and desperate. "This is a mistake," she shrieked. "I've done nothing wrong. I was improving this neighborhood." But the agents didn't pause. They moved toward her, reading her rights. That's when she made her last, desperate attempt to sway the crowd. "You want to see what I've been protecting you from?" she yelled. "Fine. Dragon Corp owns half of this neighborhood already. The moment I'm gone, they'll bulldoze your precious homes and build strip malls. I was the only thing standing in their way." But Tom stepped forward, holding up a thick folder. "Actually, Karen, you're wrong. While you were busy stealing from us, we were busy investigating. Turns out, Dragon Corp's development permits depended on them acquiring 70% of the neighborhood's properties. Thanks to your arrest and the evidence we've collected, the city council revoked their permits last night. Dragon Corp is finished here." One of the FBI agents nodded and stepped forward with the cuffs. But Karen wasn't ready to surrender. "You don't understand. I made this neighborhood better. I raised property values. I did what had to be done," she screamed. Then, in one final flailing move, she turned to run. But her designer heels betrayed her, She tripped over one of her own no parking signs and hit the pavement hard. The agents lifted her up and cuffed her. As they led her past the exact spot where she once had Sheriff Daniel's cruiser towed, Daniel stood with arms crossed, watching her with calm satisfaction. "Funny how things come full circle, isn't it, Karen?" he said. "Remember what you told me? The law is the law. Well, now you get to experience it for yourself." Her high-priced lawyers tried to intervene, throwing around threats and legal jargon, but the FBI wasn't interested. They loaded her into the car as she shouted about conspiracies, jealous neighbors, and how we'd all regret this. But no one cared anymore. We had won. The tow truck drivers, realizing this circus wasn't paying, packed up and drove off. Within minutes, the street was quiet again. But it felt new, lighter, free. We learned that Karen had been running similar scams in 3 other neighborhoods, all funneling money and influence into Dragon Corp's developments. The total stolen? Over $2 million. She was facing up to 20 years in federal prison. 3 hours later, we gathered in the park for an impromptu celebration. Someone had even strung up a banner, "Sunset Ridge, Karen-free zone." The kids were riding bikes in wide loops, their laughter cutting through the warm air. The HOA was officially disbanded. In its place, we formed a neighborhood council. No more fines, no more threats. Just people looking out for one another. "No more kings and queens," Bob declared. "Just neighbors." 6 months passed. My repair shop was thriving again. In the spot where Sheriff Daniel's car had once been towed, we installed a small plaque, "Sunset Ridge Freedom Parking, park freely. Live freely." As for Karen, she took a plea deal, 12 years in federal prison. Ironically, her assigned work? Painting parking lines in the prison yard. The guards, having heard her story, had a running joke. "Mitchell, that line's 2 inches off." That's another day. One night, as I tucked Emma into bed, she asked me something. "Daddy, why did Karen care so much about parking?" I thought for a moment, then said, "Some people think that controlling others makes them important. But real importance comes from helping people, not hurting them." Emma smiled, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Like how we all helped each other?" she asked. "Exactly like that," I whispered. "And that, right there, is how a tyrannical HOA president who once towed the sheriff's car ended up learning that karma always finds the right parking spot." She tried to use parking violations as weapons to steal homes, but in the end, she drove herself straight into federal prison. Now she's got 12 long years of painting parking lines to think about where it all went wrong. Justice, like karma, always parks where it belongs. We document the madness so you don't have to. Like, share, and subscribe, and let HOA exclusive stories be your guide through the absurd.